Hello, and welcome to another episode of TacoBytes, your daily bite of Degen, episode number 439. It is the end of a long day review for SBF. I want to do a quick shout out to everyone that is joining us via LinkedIn, YouTube 1, YouTube 2, Twitch, Twitter, Unlonely, huge shout out, Telegram, and Rumble, as well as those joining us on in Twitter Space. It was a long day getting to court this morning at about 1:50 a.m. And it was a long, chilly day this morning. As we go through the review of what happened today, court started at 9:35. Because it was a long day, but short lunch, we're just going to do a full day run through. One jury was stuck in traffic, so court got delayed to 9:50. That is where the judge sort of talked about us maybe doing a long day tomorrow once it goes to the jury and dinner, and everyone would know more later today. The prosecution opened up with their closing, talking about opening up with almost a year ago. This all started, and talking about both money gone and then when the dust settled, FTX ceased to exist, and then what happened. And so the whole purpose of the prosecution 3-hour-ish review today, closing, was sort of to paint a picture and connect all the random dots that they were making. They had 7 charges that they were having to make a clear line for, both within the conspiracy to commit fraud against investors, conspiracy to commit fraud, a conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors, conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors, consumers, and lenders, as well as not just the conspiracy but the actual committal, and then as well facing political campaign was not on the table, but it was talked about as a form of money laundering, as well as the conspiracy for oh my gosh, why am I? It has been a long day. Please forgive me. But commodities violations as well as security violations. So where they went from there, they sort of laid this great picture about FTX being a pyramid of deceit and a foundation of lies, and did the classic walkover and point down at Sam, and this defendant is responsible. And so then they sort of talked about the way that it was consumer fraud, using brand marketing like the likes of specifically named Tom Brady, as well as Larry David was specifically named, and then that's where they sort of then talked about where the money went for investments. Where the money went was through investments, loans, and political donations. And then they sort of laid out what the defense's argument might be, good faith argument. Core issue is if he knew it was wrong, and that he knew what he was doing and doing. And so one of the things they then sort of talked about was, that he testified for hours about worthless information pieces. Either the prosecution, was saying too short of answers or too long of answers, or just talking, in circles and not answering anything. And they said that because he had such an experience of talking to doing news interviews and everything like that in that month-and-a-half period after FTX's collapse, that he was able to come up with a tale, and that he wanted to walk us through it and show both how you know, Alameda sort of walked through it. And so one of the things that they tried to really paint a picture in was Alameda was Sam, Sam was Alameda, and even like dehumanizing it by saying Alameda is the defendant. And if you believe that Alameda did wrong, then Sam knowingly did wrong as well. And I think that that might have been a partial play to like I said, dehumanize the aspect of the amount of time that Sam is facing for these charges. Um, One of the things that they then started pretty much is that that he set up 2 ways to steal customer funds, and they laid out some of the witnesses that they named off, and they said that if you believe just one of those witnesses, you have to commit, that you have to find him guilty. Um, and so really we're sort of they excused the line of burden of proof was on them, but that the jury, if they believed just one of the people that they put up on the witness stand, that they had to find him guilty of things. Then this is where they sort of talked about the unlimited amount of the FTX Alameda line of credit on FTX. The way it managed this was, um, as well as some of the superior model pieces that Sam touted about FTX, including the automated liquidity engine, and that it gave Alameda FTX. Well, Sam Gary gave Alameda secret advantages, and that was both through the allow negative, non-liquidation, and non spot trade moves, so that everything was either borrowing off of someone else, margin trading, um, with leverage that it could also take a negative position. So this is where the prosecution really pushed that $65 billion number over and over again. And then at the same time, what they really did is they started to talk about the falsehoods of not just the line of credit and how outrageous it was, but like the insurance fund that FTX had. And this is where earlier testimony from Gary Wong came back, where they said that the number that they made up for the insurance fund was actually just a number that was spit out by a random number generator every day, that they gave it conditions for to create that number, and it popped out a random number for them. And this is where they then sort of moved over a little bit onto some of the exhibit pieces and redoing it and showcasing my notes. Go back. It was Santa Claus, as I have dubbed him, the financial expert for the prosecution for the government. He is the same financial expert that was used by the SEC for the SEC Ripple case. And so his sheet where he was showcasing different symbols for different crypto logos. When talking about ETH, he was using the green ETH Classic logo again, and I just had to laugh on that. So then one of the things then that they really sort of pushed was the amount of assets that were on the books, and talking about Sam moving personal assets off and around, and since it wasn't on the books, then it shouldn't be counted towards anything like that. And the fact that he was moving things around made it that he was being this big bad monster. I will say, the prosecution started to do a really good job of starting connecting dots from their pieces, and then so it was a really easy piece to sort of follow their story. They did a good job on this. And so they wanted then the defendant knew what he was doing was wrong, and no, excuse me. They came up with 6 core pieces to sort of follow these lines of how the defendant Sam knew what he was doing was wrong. First up on their list was the systems of that they set in place, of come clean or double down. And this is where they sort of showcased where they doubled down every time. the defendant buyback of stock from Binance in 2021. And they showcased emails from like Caroline Ellison and Signal messages that Caroline, we don't really have the money for this. We have to borrow from FTX. So knowing that it would have to come from FTX, Sam has showcased that he thought, it was because FTX was in surplus. And that's why it was coming to that. Next up, the defendant spending billions of dollars on new investments in late 2021. The $10 billion whole conversation and loan repayments in June of 2022. And I have a slight issue with the loan repayments, and I'll talk about that in a second. For the fake alternative balance sheets. So the buyback of stock was with customer funds, and since it was a stock piece, that brings into securities. And then on the spending of billions on investments, that also brings it under security as well as under the CFTC because they were using Bitcoin and ETH as well for investments. The $10 billion whole conversation and loan repayments from June of 2022 laid foundations for their conspiracy and committing a fraud against lenders. The fake alternative balance sheets was towards investors and lenders, and then the $14 billion hole, as well as new spending, as well as the defendant's false tweets about confession in November of 2022. What that then sort of gets into is both the money laundering side and the consumer fraud as well. Where they sort of came back into and around the billions of investments, was this one sheet that they had produced was their 10th percentile scenario, where if the market dropped by $3 billion, if everything they lost out on $3 billion, and what the NAV would be and what they would have to cover their bets on. Then also looking at it is what money they could spend if they had an extra $3 billion as well. These alternative balance sheets, balance sheet number 7 ended up getting used and is what Sam used to send to investors. Then there was, also the email with Binance on the buyback of stock, and where the prosecution sort of made him a lone wolf in this is, that one of the emails was with just him, and the rest was either like legal or Binance staff. What's really interesting though, Can Sun from Fenwick was on that email as a Fenwick employee with his Fenwick email, but he was also general counsel for FTX. So that was something that sort of got overlooked by the defense on like cross on it. So really interesting piece there. And because it was a Fenwick email that was sort of hidden into everything, I think the prosecutions slipped through that one. Then messages from Caroline Ellison, where he directed me to get loans to fixed rates and go with more investment opportunities. Times he had he had with his co-conspirators talking about loan repayments, finding the bug, and not blowing the whistle on it is a criminal conspiracy. This is where I got to see some of the investment pieces too, and this is from Exhibit 50 of the government, GX50, which we're going to be getting our hands on next week. But I got to see some of the investments, and a game I like, Battle Royale was in there as well, with a $454 million investment. And for those that know Pith Presale was in there as well. So that was a very interesting thing to see. And as we saw with the Signal chats, there was messages from Yuga as well for secret NFT project type of thing. So interesting pieces of what we found in the small details that matter to a degen like us. where the rest of the courtroom is just sort of fixated on the numbers and everything like that. Who got those numbers is what I find really interesting as well. One of the very funny things to find is one of the wallet addresses that received the BNB was in this email for exhibit 1024 and 317. And so be able to try to hunt down where all of those consumer fund pieces went as well. And so one of the things that Gary, the prosecution then quoted, about Caroline, Gary, and Sam and Nishad was, by this time these four had a long criminal history together, and they have done a lot of crime together. So this is where they're trying to get that conspiracy to commit charge interjected in there, as well as pulling out quotes from Gary Wong. But either way, the money, all of the money, came from FTX customer funds. And this was in a notification that he sent to Sam. This is where they started talking about the loans, and once they found out about the financial bug and fixed the bug, they then paid off a lot of their loans to BlockFi and Genesis. And what the prosecution originally said, when they were doing the cross with BlockFi and stuff like that, was the line, like what these loan terms looked like for FTX, because some of the tokens, that they were building up such a huge portfolio, they actually had to put down 200% collateral. So to borrow $100, they had to give them $200. So one of the things that no one really talked about was the fact that and I don't know what the terms of these open term loans were, but that was what Zach Prince had sort of said their standard was. So 2 for 1. So if they give them $1 million, they get $2 million back of collateral, or $2 billion. And so they paid back to BlockFi and Genesis roughly $1.2 billion. So that should mean then that they got back 2.4. And that is why the line of credit actually went down over time, as shown by the defense, rather than prosecution sort of piece on this. And so there's a lot of mix and match on this as well. But those tiny little detail things that like when you're talking about a collateralized loan, I remember these things, but they're just talking about a loan because all of these other loans are interest free, that there might just be they might have already known this, touched, not even like more worried about it or wanted to avoid it altogether. So yeah. Next thing that they sort of talked about was a May and June of 2022 timeline, where May 13th, they finished up the terms and services. June 13th is where they got, started to get lenders recall. June 14th is when they found the bug in FTX banking. So June 16th is when they made the repayment back to their lenders. Then June 23rd, Sam was in Congress talking about protecting customer funds. Then on June 27th, he tweeted about backdated customer funds and securing those assets for customers and stuff like that. And wants to take out new loans and needs new balance sheets. And so related party loans was also, to staff of $4.6 billion. Where they sort of talked about here was these tweets and these lender recall pieces. They were sort of trying to lay ground more on the conspiracy, but also on the offense to commit through any form of deceit of marketing in a way, like enticement in a way. And one of the things then where they were trying to get rid of the good faith argument as well, they said that, if you have 7 alt balance sheets, then you are knowing it is false. And so then they went to, they sort of talked about how FTX, ended up borrowing $13.737 billion from September on, bringing it, their total up. And then really hard to unwind Alameda, as it almost 14 billion in the red. And they all had talked about a giant hole. So what they're going on here now is they're talking about the conspiracy by more than one person. So they're trying to show that this, not organized crime ring, but criminals conspiring together to commit an overt act. Next up, they went over to like emails back from Sam to someone else, to Caroline, about 1/3 of the client assets could be paid, but here's how they committed their crime. This is what it was sort of funny. This is how the prosecution, but let me tell you how they committed their crime. And then they went to a form of like to-dos, and they had it all redacted except for one line. And they were like, this is how he committed his crime. Send a confident tweet thread. So watch out what you're doing with your tweet threads. Now and then it might be considered a crime. But that was in recognition of the tweet from Sam on November 7th that FTX is fine, assets are fine. But at that time, $8.1 billion was in the hole. And so that was where blatant opportunity to commit wire fraud, money laundering sort of fell into play on those charges. So they really laid out, had criminal intent, scheme to defraud based on tweets, wire fraud, against customers, against investors, and against wire fraud against investors, customers, and lenders. And then charge 7 was money laundering. And then they wanted to say we have the burden, and they broke down the good faith defense. I thought it would all work out okay defense, and the margin trading defense. Those seem to be the ones that Sam sort of took a liking to. That's when they also talked about Cansun a little bit, and Adam Yedidia. Adam Yedidia had immunity protection for his testimony. Cansun had a non-prosecution agreement. And they were talking about Cansun sort of using a message from Can where he was sort of talking about how Sam used to talk to him on this certain particular instance. And he was like, yeah, no, Sam just said, yep. This is when the prosecution then went back to, past Sam testimony and pulled out one of like his nervous moments or whatever, where he was saying, yep. And they're like, this happened months and months apart. This is how, we can prove that it's real. Like he came out under investigation, and he said it just how he normally would. Some of the things that they talked about was, on the commodities fraud was based on FTX stock being sold and transferred around with illiquid gains or customer funds. And then they sort of went back onto the Eco Serum staking protocol, then the insurance fund, and then they had to define and argue for venue at Manhattan. So they showcased a bunch of calls as we had the FBI agent in 2 weeks ago that sort of showed where calls were being made at certain times within Manhattan. And then one of the big things that they used was the fact that a lot of the lenders and investors were in Manhattan as well. One of the funny ones that they said was like some department store as well, where he bought a purse for someone. So that gave him venue chart, another venue piece for being in New York. And then one of the things they talked about was his GMA interview with George Stephanopoulos. And the prosecution sort of started with, false excuse given is not acting in good faith. And that's sort of what exempts him from good faith. And then they, sort of made light of some of the things he was saying yesterday about buying on margin. And the prosecution was like, Sam would want you to believe buying a muffin, it was a margin trade. And then they sort of talked about the special rules that Alameda had, and they said, they ended with this was straight up embezzlement. And then called on the defendants fraud and wanted to follow. They called on the jury to follow the truth. And do justice. The defendant is guilty. And that's how they ended their resting spot. They do have a rebuttal tomorrow morning. We return back to court. This was, very fast lunch break. And the, you know, this is where the defense sort of took over. Michael Cohen led the closing argument for SBF. Started off with jargon margin, and like some of the weird terms, doing that pleading case to the jury to sort of make the jury be like more susceptible. Like, thank you for your time. You guys have been amazing. You guys are so smart. I like your hair. You've learned so many new words, and now you know crypto so well because you learned words like margin and cross margin and Bitcoin. And you're going to be able to go do it all yourself now, is pretty much what he said. Basically asked for them to keep an open mind. And then he sort of like laid out like how the prosecution tried to make Sam look, that turned Sam into some sort of monster, just like you see in the movies. And that the prosecution's case is based on a false premise that FTX was a fraud from the start. And then they, lightened it up. They were like, we will agree that Sam was the worst dressed CEO and should have gotten more haircuts. But really, he was an awkward high school math nerd. So this is where they tried to really humanize him to the jury, as the prosecution had tried to dehumanize him. At this time, we got to, Sam's parents, were in the room, and you could sort of, I got to talk to his parents this morning, and, obviously upset of where their son's at, and, the all of it is just sort of closing in and down. And so heart goes out to his parents. Whatever their role may or may not be in all of this, as a parent, probably watching your son go through something like this, it no matter what, it's got to be hard. So yeah, heart goes out to parents. Parents are, yeah. So then this is where the defense went through some of the pictures that the prosecution showed up to say that like he was a gambler and a risk taker. And what they said is, the defense said, the prosecution showed you pictures and they wanted to tell you what it was for. And we wanted to ask the why, and we got to ask the why. So one of the things that they talked about was, Sam's picture where he's leaning against the wall with a deck of cards. So they're like, we asked about why he plays with the deck of cards. He's like, I don't even, the response was, I don't even play cards. I use them for fidgeting because I've been fidgeting my entire life. And so they're really tried to work on the breakdown of making him human. Then they went over to talk quickly on the code changes and labeled that each time every witness said that they changed the code based on events, other type of events happening, and that the code changes were made to sort of coincide with what was needed based off of these important events. Originally, some of the wire fraud piece was tied around customers thinking they were sending their money to Alameda Research or FTX, but it was going through either like North Dimension or Alameda Research. And so they talked about, how being a startup, it was hard to get bank accounts for a crypto exchange and stuff like that. And so this was the natural path of any startup, almost. Then they sort of talked over about, the crypto winter, and, anyone could look out their window and see someone that was in crypto having a hard time, and that Sam believed really it was a liquidity problem. And then in hindsight, only consider on versus off exchange assets. This is where, one of the things that Sam was accused of doing was, commodities fraud, was transferring stock pieces and stuff like that, or attempting to. And so the defense sort of told it, like Sam was even willing to put up his own assets. And that's what he put as a CEO. He put his own assets, and that's why he felt that there was a surplus of funds, and that if they had actually had a risk management officer or chief risk chief risk management department that, when this bug was originally found 6 months prior, that something would have happened rather than everyone forgetting about it and moving on, or any could have been followed up a lot longer. This is where they then broke down what a good faith defense is. And so good faith is a complete defense to all charges. And they sort of quoted, famous last words of, how did you go bankrupt? Gradually, then suddenly. Talked about how Sam then thought it was more of a liquidity issue, not a solvency. And then the defense sort of, picked on the prosecution for he kept using the storyline of the prosecution wants to turn him into, uh, uh, Sam the monster, or Sam the villain. And so what they were saying, what the defense then went about was that, if the prosecution wanted if Sam gave a long answer, they asked for a short answer. If he was giving a short answer, they were complaining that it wasn't a long answer. And if he was giving a long answer, for a complex question, they would cut him off so he wasn't able to. And so they were saying, like, nothing he does is able to make right in any way, shape, or form. And if it's your first time on stage or on the stand, you might have a lot of yups and yes in you as well. They then sort of play that more, that it was a dynamic relationship, tails you lose, heads I win. And so that they laid out sort of how many times SBF went and talked in front of important figures. He spoke in front of Congress 3 times, and that if he had really been trying to pull one over on everyone, would he have been out there so much for that? Especially when it was then set up that, earlier he had his email with Nishad and Gary that was titled, or chat, we came, we saw, we researched, where they were looking at closing Alameda Research. This is where Cohen sort of pointed out, like, if Sam was this criminal mastermind and he thought FTX was his piggy bank, why would he work to close off access to his piggy bank? And then they sort of did a timeline piece of, what FTX and FTT and Alameda Research looked like. Fall of 2017, SBF and Gary founded Alameda Research. 2018, Alameda Research moves from Berkeley to Hong Kong. Spring of 2019, SBF and Gary found FTX in Hong Kong. 2019, FTX launches FTT. 2020, Caroline Ellison and Sam Trabuccu start handling co-CEO jobs of Alameda. Summer of 2021 is when the terms and services. What is that? Sam Trabuccu and Caroline Ellison were named co-CEO of Alameda Research. And so what they labeled, Alameda as was, customers, as a customer of FTX, market maker and payment agent. Then they sort of moved into a little bit of a break piece, and we returned at about 4 p.m. And then this is where they then talked about the witnesses and what the witnesses were offered and where contradictory statements happened in the witnesses' testimony, talking about Can Sun, how he had a PhD, or has a PhD, prestigious law firms, and so he knows how to say anything. And if he thought it was wrong, he didn't have no issues with taking a $2.3 million non-collateralized, non-interest bearing loan. And that, then they talked about the different spending pieces. The $30 million for their apartment for 10 people, flights and loans. Then they started talking about the terms and services, and then they sort of broke down Professor Easton's stuff, saying, we showed in like these accounts that this FIFO was not actually working out the way they wanted it to. Um, then they sort of talked a little bit more about the fiat ad account and the info ad account and the different what those two standards for those two accounts had. Where fiat was a tracking account and info was a trading account. Um, Fiat ad account tracked FTX deposits and withdrawals via Alameda's bank accounts, and it was not visible. Um, and all of this code and these code updates that were pushed from Nishad or Gary on behalf of SBF, as the prosecution so claimed, all of these code updates were published in Slack for everyone to sort of see. And where Cohen sort of did a good job for Sam was when he was sort of talking about uh, if he was doing this, why would he do this? Um, and so, like, if there was an issue, and if it was only the core people, Sam, Caroline, um, Gary Wong, and Sam Trubraku knew about things, then why would they bring in other people to help with them? And specifically, they pointed to one of Sam's emails, about getting accounting right, and having that assigned to Andrea Lincoln. And then they wanted to talk about the liability issues tied to the fiat account. Then they went to a timeline of November 1st through 11th. What happened? November 2nd was when the CoinDesk leak document came out, which then caused a small bank run. Then on November 6th, CZ with his tweet planning to sell FTT. And that is when, their big issues of their money leaving sort of came into play, where no more than roughly 50 million in out on a day, to where, it became 100 million, 400 million, then $1 billion a day, with both money coming on and off FTX. And then they talked about with like Apollo and ordering Alameda to liquidate its assets so that it could pay off customer fund loans. And at this time, we sort of at 5:30 we had a quick break returned, and court was extended to 6:30, 6:45 ish or so. Once again, defense sort of opened up with Sam, the criminal mastermind, and he spoke with 50 journalists in a month and a half without having access to any of his documents or anything like that. And if he was so trying to hide something, would he have done that? Then they sort of talked about the different roles of the cooperative witnesses. Gary, Caroline, Nishad, Adam Yedia, Kansun, Layla Clark, and CD. I did not mention who CD was, but then they sort of talked about the years that Caroline was facing. She's facing 110 years. Gary Wong is facing 50 years, and Nishad Singh is facing 75 years. And so they talked about some of the attorneys the attorney that resigned left. And then they sort of took apart Agent Owens from the FBI, Paige Owens, her breakdown of political donation funds and stuff like that. Then the defense closed. And we will do, and that's when they continued talking for just a minute, where they wanted to end. Sam did his best and acted in good faith. And that was the end of the day. Both sides, prosecution has their opening or their closing rebuttal tomorrow. They say it should take about 30 to 45 minutes. Then the jury instruction reading, the charges will be read, and then jury instructions, and it should be sent to the jury tomorrow. Judge has asked for a late night tomorrow, as well as for people to be able to come in on Friday. So we are doing this. So we've been here for 3 weeks now. We want to thank everyone for joining in. We hope everyone has a great night, and we will see you tomorrow. And as always, we end every space with our words of wisdom and the best, worst knock-knock joke on the face of the planet. But before I do, just some of my side observations and stuff like that. It was a very different attitude today in the courtroom in general, very loud from those in the gallery and stuff like that. Now that, and this was before defense and prosecution rested, before this morning, even, before the closing arguments was done. And so it's almost like it's like the end of like a carnival or the start of one where everyone's just in a big networking event now, it seems like. And um, it's a very interesting change in feeling atmosphere in the courtroom. And so we will see how it goes. Seeing sort of, Sam in his chair, really sort of isn't allowed to turn back away, turn his chair around, but he, got to have a moment this morning with his parents, which looked nice. I don't know. My human side is coming out. I know I'm a degen. Like I literally wore a giant pink blazing orange unicorn shirt into court that says 1 inch on it. So I am a degen of the highest lowest order. And I didn't wear quite today. I wore a polygon hat today. But and wore my bit deer socks, mint mining company. And so but having a little bit of the human side sort of come up and realize and look through a lot of this stuff is sort of hard, and you can sort of see where did it all go wrong. Did they really start this from as the prosecution says, the entire time to be a scam from day one? It was just horrible accounting, and more money was thought to be there, and no one really cared because they just thought, they were like, we're on for this ride, and they didn't even know. Or was it they knew, but they didn't think they were doing anything wrong because they're like, oh, all get settled in the end, or what, or somewhere in between, or completely nefarious. We'll never know. But it was one of those things where the human touches today were interesting to see, and heart going out to, and so yeah. For those that are going to be in court tomorrow, I will see you bright and early. And for those listening in, we should be doing a lunchtime break. We will be coming hopefully around 12:30, 1 o'clock. We will not schedule because who knows how Kaplan may push it off. And then we will do it end of day, depending on what time that is. So like I said, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and our words of wisdom. Our closed mouth cannot be fed, and you cannot feed a closed mouth, meaning if no one knows you're looking for opportunity can never come a knocking. If opportunity does come a knocking and no one answers, it's going to keep on walking. And also, random side note, I guess the founders of SafeMoon got arrested today. We have to follow up on this one and find out what's going on. And we got to run into Robert De Niro as well. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But as always, we have the greatest, worst knock-knock joke for you, and that is, knock, knock. Who's there?